Okay, so hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this evening for this virtual talk and community making project. Can You Knit a Healthy Brain with Callie Lasch of the Institute of Therapeutic Craft and Creativity. For anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Stephanie Ladiana, and I am the board president of the Atlantic Highlands Arts Council. And I will run through some housekeeping and other informational stuff. But with us tonight also, you heard the voice of Manda Gorsigner, who's also one of our board members, and she's going to be running the back end for us tonight. So before we start, I'd just like to take a moment to thank our funders for tonight's programming and most of our programming. It's made possible by Monmouth Arts through funding through the Monmouth County Board of Chosen Freeholders and the New Jersey State Council on the Arts. I'd also like to mention that we did receive funding from the CARES money that was issued by our federal government and filtered through the county. That's also making this possible. So when you entered the meeting, you were muted and your video was turned off, but we've obviously asked you to put your video on. Callie has asked that if you're comfortable, to please turn your video on so that we can see each other. And if possible, have your needles or hooks and yarn in hand. And we ask that you keep yourself muted to maintain sound quality. We're also not going to have the chat box available while Callie is speaking because she'd like to save that for the Q&A later on. And the only other thing I'd like to say is that, if you don't know anything about the Atlantic Highlands Arts Council, we are a 100% all volunteer nonprofit organization, and we've been working hard since the beginning of the pandemic to bring the much needed arts and cultural programming to the community during these really challenging times. We've managed to keep ourselves afloat through the generosity of people like you, through grants, membership, and sales at our boutique in the gallery and in our window displays. We have a new exhibit going up this week. It is called Art in the Age of COVID. It's our first juried show. There will be a virtual opening next Thursday, December 17th at 7 p.m. We got over 200 submissions. About 67 artists, works from Iowa City, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. And in our windows, we have the textile artist and furniture artist French Fix, and many, many artists in our art shop. So if you need to do Christmas shopping, check us out if you take a walk downtown. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Callie Lasch. Maybe Manda will put her on speaker view for us. And she's gonna talk to us about how we can knit a healthy brain.
Thanks, Stephanie. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, very good. First, I really, really do just personally want to thank you for the work that you're doing with the Atlantic Highlands Arts Council. It's really, really important under your stewardship with your team because the creative process, as we're going to talk about tonight, is especially important in challenging times. And having a space, a community space to do that is very validating. So I just want to make sure you know that your work is really worth it.
Thank you.
So before we also get into the discussion in general, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping things too. There's a lot to cover, so I'm going to move pretty quickly. So again, if you have any questions, there will be plenty of space at the end of the talk to ask the questions. And the chat will be turned on then, but I'm also going to ask you to think about, if you have questions during the talk, to actually use a pen and a paper to write them down. Very old school, but there's a reason, and we'll be talking about that. Also, while we are really fortunate to have this technology available to us, I'd like you to just let it sort of be there for you, not you glued to it. So, if you need to do anything to make yourself more comfortable, please do it. You're here to listen and to enjoy, hopefully, And I encourage you to listen to the talk, not just for yourself, but anybody else that you can think of as we go forward, who may be someone who can benefit, someone you care about or care for aside from yourself. The presentation is going to be done in 3 parts, a little bit of background, and then some research on the hand-brain connection and how it impacts our ability to process information and provides expansive and more solution-oriented thinking. And then how that practice of knitting and crochet can actually engage the brain in that kind of mental process and healing. So as Stephanie mentioned, I am the founder and co-director of the Institute for Therapeutic Craft and Creativity, along with my project partner, Betsanne Corkhill, who is from the UK. She's living in the UK right now. And she is the author of Knit for Health and Wellness, How to Knit a Flexible Mind and More. And everything that we talk about here, about the application of knitting and crochet specifically, as a valid form of a therapeutic process, comes from her research, which she's been doing since 2005. It was very, very hard fought research that she did. And you'll be hearing a bit more about that in detail as we go forward also. My own background is that I actually come from a media background as a writer and producer of educational programming in the public interest on a wide range of topics. Knitting and crochet and advocating for the value of art and craft has been one of them, particularly as it relates to handwork, creative handwork as a tool for transformative cognitive development and learning. So here we go. It can get a little deep, so I'm hoping that you'll just ride it with me. These days, we talk a lot about mindfulness, and that's a really, really good and important thing. But what we're learning also is that mindfulness is a practice that begins in the head, and we talk about clearing the mind and using breath and mantra and so forth, and those are really, really useful tools. But it doesn't always work for everyone. And as Betsanne says, that's because essentially mindfulness through meditation is a top-down experience. It's something that begins in your head, and then you try to make your body respond to it. But knitting and crochet are also actually another tool in that toolbox, and one that begins with the hands and the body and then transfers into the head. By engaging our hands and the repetition and rhythm of knitting and a lot of other creative activities, but tonight we're here to talk about knitting and crochet, it creates a meditative state that, again, starts in the body and moves into the mind. It's a body-up approach. So rather than feeling frenetic and knowing that we need to calm down and trying to convince ourselves to clear our mind and so forth, if we engage ourselves physically, we are going to move that hand-brain connection into a place that helps us to find that meditative state. So the hands are tools of communication, and that works 2 ways. One is for the information that we take in, and the other is the way that we express ourselves. So when we talk about handwork and craft, we're really at a very basic level talking about a sense of touch. And that is a communication that is primal, that occurs in terms of our act of reaching out and wanting to learn things. And I'm sure we've all experienced that when we want to understand how something works, we automatically reach out to touch. Tactile sensations are intuitive. And because our hands inform our brains, reaching out helps us gather information and understand. So hands are also tools of articulation. They express what's in our brain. We use them. I know that I use them a lot to articulate our thoughts, the intensity of what we're feeling, and our intentions. So we know that, for example, we point, we clap, we salute, we pray, we throw our fists, we grab, we take a hand in marriage. We use a ring on a finger to symbolize that bond. We used to shake hands to greet and join hands in solidarity. And researchers are actually right now studying, this is sort of a new approach to studying hands. They're not just studying the bones as fossils, but they're using 3D mapping to analyze the joints between the bones. And by studying the hand anatomy in that way, they're able to determine how the hands were used in terms of dexterity, movement, loading, and grip. And that is enabling them to determine the level of intelligence and sophistication of certain people. So what I think is also interesting is that there was a report recently in Scientific Reports about the fact that they just found what they consider to be the oldest cord fragment, yarn, that has ever been found. And it's 3 bundles of fibers that were twisted together. And they believe that this was made from the inner bark of a tree. And that means that it was used as a tool because they found it wrapped around stone and a stone tool. And it would mean that it would have required knowledge of the growth and seasonality of these types of trees and how they could be used. So it's by studying what Neanderthals were doing with their hands that they are able to understand how they were processing their brains. So the communication of the hands is also tied specifically to the neural pathways. And research tells us that 60% of the brain is devoted specifically to what we're doing with our hands, and that the brain develops new neural pathways when the hands are creatively engaged. And that's because when our hands are creatively engaged, we are exploring a creative process, and we're acquiring what's called process knowledge. And that process knowledge stimulates a sense of discovery and innovation, and that translates into all other aspects of our whole person health. How we process information, make decisions, think about things. So because we use our hands to connect and explore and guide and form what we're making, we are training our brain to make those connections and go through those processes whenever we're making other decisions. So it enables us to have this more expansive thinking. And this is an inner dialogue that goes on, not just from the hands to the brain, but within the brain. And it then transfers into almost all of our other behaviors. The decisions we make, how we act out in relation to those decisions. And of course, those decisions play a role in our place in life and our sense of well-being and happiness. Deepak Chopra, who is a well-known author, is also an endocrinologist, a neuroendocrinologist, which means he studies brain chemistry. And he pursued this area of science specifically to find out how and whether there is a biological basis for the influence of thoughts and emotions. And he says that wherever a thought goes, a molecule follows. So our emotions impact our lifestyle choices. We know this, but what may be less known to us in terms of how we are trained as children in school and our learning and so forth is how to impact deliberately the processing of those emotions, that emotional intelligence to our benefit. So maybe some of you have heard there's an old Cherokee saying that it's the story of 2 wolves, and it's a metaphor for the debates that go on inside of us when we're faced with decisions that we have to make. It's about processing information. Is it good or bad? Will I or won't I? Should I or shouldn't I? Those kinds of things. And the Cherokee characterized this back and forth in a fable. And they call it the fight between 2 wolves. And one wolf, one side, represents the characteristics of our worst selves, such as anger, envy, regret, greed, sorrow, self-pity, arrogance, resentment. And the other wolf represents the characteristics of our better selves, an inner serenity, a generosity, a sense of reason, a kindness, confidence, and confidence with humility. So in a battle between these 2 wolves, the characteristics are at play. And the question is, which one do you think will win? And the answer is, of course, the one you feed. So mental thoughts alter brain chemistry. Mental thoughts impact the development of neural pathways. And the more you nurture or feed a certain neural pathway, the more it expands. What I like is that the Cherokee didn't need science to tell them that. They intuited that. But today we have this mapping process of the brain that is helping us to understand and see exactly how that works. So it also ties in to health in the sense that emotion is tied to disease. And Dr. Esther Sternberg, who is the author of a book called The Balance Within, The Science Connecting Health and Emotions, writes, we are discovering that while feelings don't directly cause or cure disease, the biological mechanisms underlying them may contribute. And many of the nerve pathways underlying psychological responses and inflammatory disease are the very same nerve pathways. So if we know stress causes physiological responses, we now know also that memory encodes those emotional responses into our bodies. Stress is also the most similarly pronounced word in the greatest number of languages. So when it comes to knitting and crochet, most of us intuitively know that it makes us feel good. It makes us feel calmer, more centered, and our better selves. And that really should ultimately be the best reason that we have for doing it. But it also gives us a tool, another tool in our toolbox to know that by knowing it makes us feel better, we should be able to deliberately engage knitting and crochet when we need to feel better, when we know that we need to improve our state of well-being. Is it going to heal our ills? Of course not. But it's something that we can call upon when we need a greater sense of ourselves, a sense of control over our choices, because it's going to expand our thinking. It's going to allow us the time and the space and our body, that meditative, rhythmic state that will translate and transform into the neural pathways that will help us with those choices. So, you know, we're under a lot of stress at the moment for a lot of reasons. And when you add all of the pieces, the mental, the physical, just the day-to-day parts that we need to do just to take care of ourselves going throughout the day, never mind someone that may be in our care or someone who's not feeling well, it's a lot. So if we know that we have a tool that we can engage with, even just for a short period, several times a day, 10 minutes, a few times a day, it can provide an opportunity for us to relax, and that will help us. So one of the other reasons that knitting and crochet, but primarily knitting in this case, also has an impact on us is that it's a rhythmic movement that crosses the midline of the body. So the midline of the body is basically an imaginary line that goes from the head to the toes and, you know, right down the center. And while it is technically imaginary, it also isn't, because there are many parts of the body that have two halves. The brain, of course, is one. If you've ever known anyone who had shingles, they typically get it on one side or the other of the body. The body does have two halves. And when we cross the midline, it connects the body with the brain and activates the communication between the two sides of the brain. We're learning more about the fact that these halves are more connected than we think, but in fact, crossing the midline in a rhythmic pattern will assist us in engaging those parts of the brain. And it's an important developmental skill at every age, for children and forever. When you cross the midline, you continue to develop neural pathways for fine motor skills. And of course, you know, as we know, when we age, we lose some of our fine motor skills, particularly in the hands. And there was a report in Frontiers in Aging, which talks about the fact that fine motor skills are important as we age, to very many daily activities, such as simply buttoning a shirt, unlocking a door, selecting coins from a wallet. And if these skills deteriorate, it impacts how we are able to live and sometimes whether we're able to live independently. And it creates obstacles in our daily life that cause frustration. So it also impacts the regulatory role of our movements and sense of balance. So our fine motor skills support proper communication between both sides of the brain. So when you knit in particular, crochet you can adapt. We're going to talk about that a little later. But when you knit in particular, you are crossing that midline. It's also a tool that is a meditative, relaxing process. It lowers blood pressure. It helps with stress. And again, it improves cognitive skills. If you think about why people pace, they crisscross their arms and their legs. That's crossing the midline of the body. We know that when we need to think about something, we go out, we take a walk, and something occurs to us in the shower. People always say, I had this brainstorm in the shower. You're crossing the midline of the body when you wash. So when we talk about this word cognition and developing cognition by the crossing of the midline of the body, we're getting into that process of knowing again. And those include aspects specifically such as reasoning, awareness, perception, knowledge, intuition, and judgment. And those cognitive skills are mental capabilities that allow us to process, and we get information from all our senses. And these are the skills that are needed for us to be able to think, talk, learn, and read. And what gives us the ability to recall things from memory. So if we are able to recall things, we're able to analyze them. And we're able to perceive them in ways that are more expansive and draw associations with them that are really important. So once again, it goes to the idea that this gentle, calming, seemingly simple act of knitting and crochet are actually very, very powerful tools that absolutely impact our whole person health. When it comes to the idea of therapeutic knitting, which is what my partner Bets Ann has pioneered, the first thing is that we have to validate that this is an act that actually matters. And the next thing that we need to do is give ourselves permission, make the space and the time. Many of us, are caught up in all this busyness and all this kind of, when I wait and maybe there'll be the right time sooner or later kind of thing. And that's a good thing, but it seems like we're never done. It's never done. And we always have more jobs, more tasks, more chores, et cetera, especially in these times. But self-care is important. We know that intellectually. And none of us can operate on a full throttle without losing something else. So regular breaks are really important for the mind and the body to be able to recharge. You do it for other people. You tell them they should take a break. You give your phone a recharge. You need to do it for yourself. It's not a matter of want really anymore. It's a matter of need. And it's a matter of health. So I think that sometimes we even forget what it's like to be relaxed, to live in a relaxed state. The novelist Gustave Flaubert said this about the creative process. He said, be regular and orderly in your daily tasks so that you may be violent and original in your creative work. Now, I'm not necessarily keen on the word violent, but I get the point. So to begin to wrap your mind around how you can make space, if that's not something that you're already doing, is simply really three things. One is make it obvious. Keep your project, when you decide which one that is, and we're going to talk about that in a few minutes, but keep your project obvious. Keep it out, keep it visible, keep it readily available to pick up, and keep it simple. So that you don't shy away from it because you don't feel like dealing with it. The other thing is, that's the point, make it easy. Don't put pressure on yourself. And if you engage regularly, make a deal with yourself for these 10-minute little bursts, if that's what it takes for you, 3 times a day or whatever. If you give yourself permission and don't put the pressure, you'll be able to make it easier, and it will get easier as you do it. The other thing is make it attractive. Find a way to create a ritual around your practice. Maybe it's the time you sit and have a cup of your favorite coffee. Maybe you use your favorite chair and have a conversation with someone. Maybe it's your quiet time. For me, I know that I like to sit when the light is in a special time of day. So you also should give yourself permission to be very present. We talk about mindfulness, but it's also a time to be mindless to some degree. You don't want to flood your mind with all kinds of things. In fact, you want to see if you can find a daydreamy state. Just find a way to just sit back, know that you're going to be present with your work, and begin. See how far you get. You don't have to, it doesn't have to be goal oriented. Just let it flow. I am not a good knitter by any stretch of the imagination. And I come from a family of very good knitters, master knitters, in fact. But I make short projects. I make them simple. I simply knit to go back and forth and find that rhythmic pace. That's fine enough for me. Other people will be more interested in the challenge of more intense works and projects, different kinds of stitches and colors and so forth. And if that's what floats your boat, that's the point. Do what makes you happy. It's also important to recognize our triggers. So if you set out a ritual for yourself and you find that you're not finding your time or making your time, what are those triggers that stop you? Or if you're in the middle of your knitting and crochet time and you're feeling anxious, what is the trigger? It's a wonderful time to listen to ourselves, to give ourselves the space to talk to ourselves in a way that we can hear, not just chatter and not responsiveness to every single, bing and ting and ring that we hear, but to take the time and give ourselves permission to just hear, to look at our own habits, not someone else's, but our own. Where are we? What are we doing? How are we responding? And maybe even let it go. And in that rhythmic motion, we may find a bit of solution coming into our vision. So the Institute for Therapeutic Craft and Creativity is about a lot of different kinds of handwork, creative handwork. But one of the reasons that we focus on knitting in particular is because of all of the things we've just talked about, but it's also a craft work that is accessible. It can be expensive, but it can also be inexpensive. You can go and get a skein of yarn, a ball of yarn for a couple of bucks. It takes a ball of yarn and a couple of needles, some very limited instruction, and you can begin. It's quiet. It's something that you can do in bed at night when the rest of your house is sleeping. You can do it in a car. We work with nurses and so forth who can do it in a break room at work. And it's about the opportunity to take that break, to find your way forward, to give yourself permission to have a series of nows, not what happened in the past, not what you're worried about in the future, but processing the right now. So it's like any other exercise, right? It's like the conditioning of a heart or a muscle. You need to condition the brain and those neural pathways to become healthier and more expansive and larger. Tune in, engage, trust your senses, use your senses, listen to your senses, listen to your voice, and see how it works for you. So I think that's all I have to say at the moment. And I'm happy to do some questions and answers now, if you're game.
I would just say, if anyone has a question, feel free to unmute yourself. You were muted during the program, but feel free to unmute and ask your questions directly to Callie, or you can type them in the chat box if you'd like.
So if no one has any questions, or if a question comes up later, I guess a lot of you are probably curious about, the project we're working on. So this kind of came about when I met Callie over a year ago. She dropped a card off at the Arts Council, and we were planning on having this talk last year, and then we were going to do it earlier this year. And we also talked about doing a project around Veterans Day to do a quilt that we could donate to a Veterans Association. And so when the pandemic hit and I hadn't spoken to her for months, and I reached out and I said, hey, we've got some money to do some virtual programming. What do you think about doing this knitting talk? And she was game. And I said, well, why don't we just combine the two ideas that we had, the talk, and then we'll make a community project. And she loved the idea. And I just thought it was a great way for people who I am not a knitter or a crocheter, although I did admit to the fact that I did crochet when I was about 9 years old, and I have a bunch of squares that I've never put together, which I may be inspired to do so now. We just thought it would be a great idea to get people that are doing the same thing alone together, and to give something, to have the community come together to give something to someone who's in need, suffering, in pain, or whatever. And it would just be a nice way to kind of get us together. And we're hoping that we can do this once a year to get people together. So I do have a question, Callie. Based on what I heard you say, it sounds to me like knitting and crocheting should actually be taught to children in school. It should be in the curriculum at schools today.
Absolutely. Well, absolutely. So Rudolf Steiner schools have been doing this for a very long time. The Waldorf schools are doing this. And there are schools that I have worked with in the past who do this because there are certain teachers in the school who understand that it has a place and it can be useful. In fact, part of my video career was one of my clients was the Craft Yarn Council of America, and part of my work there was to encourage new generations of knitters and crocheters, starting with very young children. And also, I will just say on our website for the Institute for Therapeutic Craft and Creativity is a video of the students that we did from a school in Newark, where they had it's a very technical school, and everything that they do there is technology based. But the only different category of learning that they have there is knitting and crochet. And they even went to the extent of building a large classroom in the school that has a kitchen in it, and these kids grow plants on the roof of the school, harvest them, use them to dye in the pots and in the kitchen in the classroom, and then they use fleece and they spin and they knit and they crochet and they make. And so we went in and we interviewed these kids about the difference that it makes for them. And I was absolutely floored. We invited them to participate. We had a line around the hallways of kids that wanted to share. And they talked about the many things that we talk about, that I've talked about tonight, that we know are instinctive, that it was calming, that they stopped fighting with their brother or sister as a result, or when they knew they were going to get into something, they just went into their room, they did some stitches. That one little girl said to me that one of the things that she liked about it is that in doing her schoolwork, and she's always on the computer, when she wants to know something, she Googles. But when she knits or she crochets, she doesn't get the answers. She has to find her way to the answers, and she likes that. And it went from there. They were tremendous. And so it's one of the reasons we we are very big on the idea of teaching kids about this, and also because we're finding that the technology, again, is a wonderful, wonderful tool, but there are studies out there about how technology is taking the decision-making process away from us in ways that we are really not even aware of. You can talk about social media in particular and how their algorithms are designed to keep you, right? They're designed to keep you engaged. They more or less are controlling your neural pathways. That's basically how it's going. So the idea of taking back control over how you think by giving yourself the space to figure out what that even is in today's world, that's a big thing. So yes, the answer is yes, it's really important for kids.
Yeah. So that actually kind of goes back to how when you and I first met and you told me about this whole, your institute and just your involvement in all this stuff. I was kind of on the verge of trying to launch an after-school fiber arts workshop for the students at the local elementary school, with the Arts Council being on First Avenue. I thought, what a great way, kids who don't play sports need to have something involved. And so I still have that on my agenda to try to do at some point with the Arts Council while I'm there. But I think it's important to bring back things like knitting, crocheting. I did needle pointing as a kid. My mother always threw us outside to go play in the mud and build forts and stuff. But I think that has to be done. And I think with kids, maybe the pandemic happened for a reason. Maybe we're going to be getting back to some old-fashioned crafts, and people will become more engaged in these types of things to kind of help with the stress, and just because they've realized that it's available and it's good and there's benefits.
And I think we're a little screened out right now.
Yes.
And sometimes people don't necessarily know what to do. It's a default, right? Just go to the screen,
Yes.
Find something new.
Yeah,
but
I'm guilty of that. Yeah.
We all are, because it's there, it's easy, and we're trained. But I think that if we give alternatives, maybe the kids are kind of done with tech a little bit. It's intergenerational also. That's a beautiful thing. And the other thing is that when you knit, the stories come out, right? We know that. Knitting circles, or Beth Ann has worked with a group of migrant women that came over to the UK, and they were there because they were truly in some bad shape. They had been through some things that were very traumatic. And they couldn't speak even. They had just completely taken away their ability to process. And she sat them in a circle and said, you don't have to talk. You don't even have to look at each other. We're going to knit. And over the period of weeks, first came the tears, and then eventually came some words, and then came conversation and friendships. And, it's the engagement. It's the engagement. We did a lot of work with college kids who were learning to knit and crochet, and young men who were fathers for the first time and looking to make something while their wives were pregnant, reduce stress. And they wound up making toys for their new babies. That's something. One guy was adorable. He made a crocheted snake. And when you flipped it over, it had buttons. You unbutton the button and little baby crocheted mice popped out.
Oh my word. You told me a story about, I think your friend in the UK who handed her knitting to a veteran.
Yes, because,
it was and that's when it hit her, that the calmness that came.
She was a physiotherapist for the National Institutes of Health, and she was given some of the most challenging cases, and she was unable to, they cut funding. She was unable to approach everyone in a very dedicated way, and it was frustrating to her. But she, in a moment one day, just handed somebody her knitting and said, I have to tend to these people, do this. And she noticed that it was immediately calming and engaging. She just took note. And then over time, she began to do it as a practice, to hand it to people that she was having a lot of difficulty with and had no other resources to be able to modify behavior. And so she went to the British government. It's pretty funny. She went to the British government and said to them, you know, I'm seeing these things. I'd very much like to study these things. I'd like some funding in order to do that. And they said, yeah, knitting. And no, we're not going to do that. And so she went away and she came back and she said, okay, what if I have a bilateral rhythmic psychosocial intervention that I think would be very useful for physiotherapists and healing? And they were like, okay, fine.
And so, she got the funding.
So, she renamed it, and it's,
Yeah.
So it's about how we look at things, right? It's about perspective.
Yeah.
But that's sort of the point, that if we look at our knitting and crochet, not necessarily as an escape, or, I mean, it's good to do that, but if we look at it as a tool that we can deliberately engage, and be mindful and mindless about it at the same time, it's powerful. It's really, really powerful.
Very cool. So with that, regarding the community making project that we're working on, I don't have a deadline per se, because I don't want to put stress on anybody during the holidays. We have a show that's being installed on Thursday and Friday of this week, and it will be hung at the gallery. That show will be hung at the gallery through January 23rd. And my goal is to get everyone's squares that's contributing, that are, everyone who is contributing a square or multiple squares to this project. If you can get them to us at the Arts Council, you can either deliver them in person to 54 First Avenue during our open hours. The only day we're closed is Monday, or you can mail them to us at 54 First Avenue in Atlantic Highlands. Everybody got the instructions. They're 7 by 9 inch squares. And we will have the quilt, I keep calling it a quilt. It's not a quilt. I did quilt actually at one point in my life. We'll have the squares put together into an Afghan or a blanket, and I have everyone's contact information. My goal is to either hang it in the window of the gallery, or it'll be in the back of the gallery. We have a black curtain up, and I'll hang it there, and it'll be on display in the gallery for a week or two or longer, and then we will donate it. So we are also still accepting ideas for places or people to a person to donate it to. If you want to reach out to Callie or us at the Arts Council, we'll take a look at those, and then we'll let everybody know what happens. So did I forget anything, Callie?
I don't think so.
So my goal is, the sooner you can get us the squares, the better. And the sooner we get the number of squares to make the minimum size blanket, Afghan, we'll get that done, and we'll keep everybody posted. So, we are going to be open through the end of the year, closed on Christmas Day and New Year's Day. And so that's what our goal is. So hopefully you will all be able to come and see it when it's completed.
Oh, there is one more thing, Stephanie, actually, which was the idea that maybe if anybody wants, if you're going to be contributing a square, feel free to write a note.
Oh, yes.
To the recipient as a contributor, for you as a contributor, to them as a receiver. And it can be simple, a little heart, you can doodle, whatever you want. But also, and if you have any thoughts about anything that you want to share that you've experienced while making it, with the sentiment of giving as well, could be nice for someone to receive that.
We do have a question here from Barbara. What yarn should we use?
It was a worsted weight. It's, let me take a look. It is acrylic, #1, because it's washable, and a worsted weight, 7 by 9 inch square.
Yeah, and if you go to the link on our website to Warm Up America, which is, they have this great pattern list that it tells you that, it tells you the gauge, based on the finished size of 7x9, what size needle to use, needles to use, what, the number of stitches per inch, the type of material. And then for crocheting, it tells you, again, also the gauge and the hook size for worsted weight acrylic yarns. And I think that the reason they suggest acrylic is because it's just easier to care for.
Yes.
Hello, Callie.
Hello.
Wendy. I'd just like to thank you very much. I knew I liked to knit. Now I know why. Part of it. I like the idea with the core. Just that using both sides of the body and making it symmetrical, I guess. And very, very interesting. Very uplifting too. Interesting how it, why it does, it's just,
it validates. It validates
right, yes,
what you've been feeling,
Yes, thank you. Yes,
thank you for sharing that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
So if no one has any other, oh wait, Lisa Sanders. Okay, sorry, Lisa. Lisa's like, wait a second, I've waited for so long for this. So I just want to introduce, Lisa is very new to knitting. She stopped me on the street in front of the gallery one day and said, I just started knitting. So she's a new knitter. I did my square, but it is not exactly 7x9. So will I make it? So she'll make another one. Let's see. Does anybody want to share their squares with us if they've made them?
Share your square.
Oh, beautiful. Beautiful. Oh, wow. More than one. So it's going to be an interesting project. I've never done anything like this. I don't know. As knitters and crocheters, I'm sure you all have. But for me, I think it's pretty cool. So.
Steph.
Yes.
I have one more.
Yes.
My girlfriend, she talked about something about Alzheimer's and helping. Do you have any information on that, on how knitting might help with fighting Alzheimer's, or do you know anything about that?
So here's what I'm going to say, because I hesitate because, this is not a cure, right? We know that, right? But anything that you can do to tap into benefiting brain health is going to help. Do you know what I mean? It's going to, sometimes, if nothing else, it provides a focus. Sometimes, if nothing else, it provides, something for caregivers of people with Alzheimer's to be able to do while caring. So I can't say anything about it specifically, but if someone is capable, they may not be. It may be it may be a little dangerous even. Do you know what I mean? But it's something that you should look at individually and know that it's not just necessarily about the person that's dealing with it, but the person that's caring as well. I will, if you put your information in the chat or send it to me, email it to me, I will look for more information specifically on that for you, if you like.
Yeah, I think everybody has Callie's email address was in one of the emails I sent out. So if you have any questions, really feel free to reach out to her. She's, as you can see, she's really wonderful and she's very knowledgeable. And if no one else has any other questions, I think we've probably all zoomed out for one night. And if you have any questions after you're done, I'm at the Arts Council Tuesdays from 3 to 6 and Sundays from 11 to 3. The gallery is open Tuesdays through Sundays. So stop in if you have your square ready, and we will stay in touch as this project continues. Okay. So I wanted to thank Callie for doing this. I know she was very nervous and you did fantastic. And I have a message here, 2 messages I'm just going to read. It says, thank you very much. This was incredibly informative. Stay safe. Another person says, excellent information. Thank you for the event. Thank you so much. This was fun.
Can I just say that thank you for attending, because that's what we do it for. And without you, it would mean nothing, right? So thank you.
That's right. And yes, thank you all for attending. So hopefully you can all come to see the quilt when it's done. Not the quilt, the Afghan. Oh my God. Okay. All right. Good night, everyone. I'm going to end this now. Thanks so much for attending.
Bye.
Bye.